right. Well, welcome to a new podcast episode. Today's podcast episode is about this confusion that I see, more specifically on Reddit and in personal conversations with people, where there's trade schools and then there's registered apprenticeship programs. People conflate the two. They think that trade schools are something that they're not. They don't take into consideration registered apprenticeship programs and all the benefits they got. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just do a podcast episode. It's not a complete deep dive. As a matter of fact, each entity probably deserves its own podcast episode. But at least take a nice deep dive into, what are they? And then let's talk about comparing the two, if you will. And so that's what this podcast episode does. Now, before we get into this podcast episode, I want you to think about where we're going from here. More specifically, what does the employment landscape look like in the construction industry in a decade from now? And which one is going to be better at helping us solve the issue? Because make no mistake, if you are a contractor and you believe you don't have the time and you can't afford to train apprentices or, young journeymen, I'm here to tell you can't afford not to. So keep that in mind as I continually, kind of talk about the two and basically at the end of this, promote registered apprenticeship programs and how you should be a part of one. Keep that in mind. Let's talk about the two. Let's look at the different nuances and whatnot. And let's get this podcast episode started. Thanks for, listening for those of you who tune in and those of you who either watch or listen to the content depending on how you consume it, right? So, and by the way, whatever platform you happen to basically consume the content, I would ask that you subscribe and like and share, because as the content begins to grow, so too should the reach. And to that end, when we start talking about the reach that this platform is looking to do, when you go onto the website in particular, you will find numerous social media channels. Now, each one has a specific purpose. And in the next, 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is, as the content on the podcast and as we continually drop more articles, you're going to see greater usage. Maybe that's how you actually came to listen to the podcast or, website articles in the first place. But no matter, what platform you might be using, I would ask that you subscribe and share alike. But in the interest of growing this platform and all of the various information that we talk about here on this platform, one of the social media outlets that I've begun here in the past month that I'm really, really liking is Reddit. Now, if you don't know, Reddit is, it's just basically what Reddit is. It's a giant online internet platform. That's what it is. I think Reddit went public a couple months ago. And this whole idea of this online platform where people can just go and ask questions. They can share stuff too. But there are a lot of times they'll ask questions. And so all we're doing here from the Wealthy Ironworker is going, to where people are already at. They're already curious, asking kind of questions, and we're interjecting, speaking, some of these truths into people's lives, if you will, and we're getting good feedback. Now, in the interest of transparency from a Reddit perspective, I actually really enjoy it. But one of the things that I'm noticing, among others, is there is a confusion that people have when it comes to trade schools. It seems that in various subreddits, so you have Reddit as a whole, and then there's various subreddits where people can go and like-minded individuals kind of gather together. If you like sports, if you like movies, if you like anime, if you like skilled trades, you like writing, almost whatever that you might like is actually a subreddit on there. And on various subreddits from a skilled trades perspective, it's amazing to me the number of individuals who are, number one, asking about what trade, and number two, they're talking about going to trade school. It is it's a recurring theme. Trade school, trade school, trade school, trade school. And over and over again, I am finding myself telling people, hey, in as so much as you can, skip trade school and go to a registered apprenticeship program instead, which of course prompts some robust discussion. But it made me think, well, maybe I need to drop a podcast episode delineating. Let's talk about the differences between trade school and a registered apprenticeship program. Now, each one, to be blunt with you, each one deserves its own podcast episode and eventually an article taking a more deeper dive into what they actually are, the mechanics of them, and maybe even some of the historical, how they got to be, where they're at, and etc. But for the purposes of this podcast, I just want to have something that I can point people to. And those of you who listen can have something that you point others to that maybe explains some of the primary points of difference that when you're talking to someone, they might find enlightening. Because I keep finding, number one, people are talking about it. And number two, I don't think people understand the significant differences between the two. And if you're listening today or watching and you don't know the difference between the two, well, then stay tuned because I'm going to talk about it because it's important that people really understand. And you might not think, okay, well, even if you could sit here and think into mind, well, they don't sound too different. There's a bit of a difference between the two that has what I would say are long-term ramifications. So let's kind of set the stage a little bit. Multiple people, when you are either listening to a podcast or you read articles on the website, will understand that we have a significant problem here on this platform with the saying that you've got to go to college to get a good job. Now, we're not against higher education. I think higher education has its purpose. It's been distorted in the pursuit of the almighty dollar, and the educational quality has decreased. But in the pursuit of increased money, increased coffers, what higher educational institutions, what they're really good at, to be blunt with you, at least in this category, is they're really good at looking at the data and the trajectory and seeing, okay, well, we need to, let's say, come together with some curriculum that appeals to individuals from a trade perspective. See, what college used to be, and this is, we're going way back now, but one of the things that it used to be, you would get let's say a liberal arts degree. This is what Andrew Hacker, if you go to the website, you'll see there's 2 book reviews that I've done on Andrew Hacker's books, The Math Myth and Other STEM Delusions. And the second book is Higher Education with a question mark, because he critiques higher education. And basically what he's taken aim at, among other things, is this idea of vocational training, which is what a trade school effectively is. And he would laud for a return to a liberal arts education where people are sitting here and they're having a 4-year degree or whatever, where they're being educated in the classics. And the whole concept or idea, at least in his frame, and I think he's probably right, is the idea is to get you to be more critically thoughtful, your critical thinking skills, to go, that doesn't sound quite right to me, and not just cancel down someone or shout someone down. That was, and college used to have I think it was Jonathan Haidt who said the higher learning educational institutions used to have a favorable rating in the American public, but that's been dwindled. And there's a lot to be said about what's going on today with cancel culture, with indoctrination, etc. But add to that, to be sure, this idea that we're going to dumb down education, we're going to depart from critical thinking skills, and we're going to focus on, to some degree anyway, vocational training. When you go to any particular community college or university, it's more on the community college level than it is at the university level. But when you go there and you look, you might be astounded to discover the number of quote unquote degrees or training programs for specific vocations. This is a systemic problem as far as I'm concerned. And the reason why is because we have a love affair in this country with firms, whether it's a construction firm or whether it's an entire industry who loves to offshore any and all training, or at least attempt to offshore any and all training to the individual workers that they're trying to recruit. And we go through this whole process, and it's been an experiment for the past 30, 40 years. And what we what people, when you look at this and you have real robust conversations, they may not admit it, but when you talk to them, one of the things you'll find out is that this has not been successful. Companies have to then come in, have conversations. They have to have training in-house for either the specific job or the process or, their company culture, whatever it happens to be. And so you miss the mark. And effectively what you're doing then in this attempt to offshore any and all training through the vocational training that is so rampant today, you are spending more money and you're getting less product. I had an apprentice on here not too long ago on the Apprentice Spotlight series who specifically talked just about that. He didn't denounce the training, if you will, but he brought into the trade a level of arrogance with him. I've gone through trade school. I'm good. And then he came in and found out, oh, by the way, I don't know anything really. There's so much that I don't know. And because that's the case, I make, this distinction between trade school. It needs to be made. This discussion, this distinction, this elevation, if you will, of registered apprenticeship programs over trade schools. Now, with a lot of that groundwork laid, let's talk about a trade school. A trade school, effectively, is what I would say, and this is you can look it up on various definitions and see what you want. But a trade school is essentially some place where you go and pay money to learn a particular skill. It could be HVAC, it could be electrical, it could be a program that tries to be a little bit more encompassing. It could be electrical, HVAC, pipe fit and plumbing, whatever. It could be welding. And it could involve numerous processes in, it could be gas tungsten or TIG welding. It could be shielded metal arc welding or stick welding. It could, a number of processes, but it's where you as an individual are going to pay somebody or pay an institution, in this case, money to then turn around and train you. And you think, well, this makes sense. After all, this is the college model. Well, that's where it's adopted from. I'm going to go and pay money. Now, there's several problems with this. Intuitively, a lot of people were probably thinking, okay, well, this makes sense to me. I don't see a problem. Well, there's several problems with this. Number one, some trade schools, not all, but some trade schools will have employers that are like feeders, meaning the trade school can then feed you into an employer, an employer relationship. That's not always the case. In fact, I would argue that that's rarely the case. What I am finding and what I am hearing from different people, and we have all these communications with different apprentices and apprenticeship instructors and whatnot, what I'm finding is a lot of trade school individuals end up into a registered apprenticeship program anyway, or the alternative, which is worse, they feel like they can't find a job. We'll get into that in a second. So if you're using a trade school, I'm talking to the person who might be on the fence about going. If you're thinking about getting into a trade school and learning a particular skill, and then you're going to end up getting connected with a registered apprenticeship program, far better for you to just skip the trade school, skip spending the money that you're going to spend to learn that skill and learn it in a registered apprenticeship program. Number one, you save the money. You don't spend the money. Now, I probably should have done my research and given you more data on how much you're going to spend, but I knew that I was going to eventually do a separate podcast on it, and I'll dive into some more of the mechanics there. Nonetheless, save yourself the money. You're going to spend the money to go to a trade school to learn something. Whereas in a registered apprenticeship program, you're going to get paid to go to work and to learn because you're going to go to the apprentice school. Now, it depends. There's a bunch of different flavors on how that happens. Meaning, do you go on nights? Do you block scheduling? Whatever. There's all kinds of flavors for that. But the reality is registered apprenticeship programs that are governed by the Department of Labor. They're the golden standard. They're governed by the Department of Labor. They're specifically laid out. You are going to go and get paid. And I might add, throughout the duration of your apprenticeship, on a typical 6-month basis, you're going to get raises. You're going to know, so long as the work hours line up with your school. I mean, this is, like I said, it's governed by the Department of Labor that specifically talks about how much education, how many classroom hours, as opposed to on the job hours, and they're meant to be together, rising together. When you're doing this, you're going to get a raise every 6 months, and you're not paying. You're getting paid because you're going to go to work, and then you come in, to school. So that's a big difference. Skip paying that. Number two, there are no the trade schools. In other words, trade schools are not governed by the Department of Labor. They don't have to adhere to the same standards that a registered apprenticeship program has to. What you may not know, what you probably don't know actually, with a registered apprenticeship program is that because it's governed by the Department of Labor, it undergoes audits on a routine basis. And they're not small fry. This isn't, I turn in a couple of pieces of paper saying it's good and that's it. That's not how Department of Labor audits work, especially when it comes to, and then there's also the internal audits that those particular registered apprenticeship programs go through within, whether it's, pipe fitting, electrical, ironwork, whatever it happens to be. They have their own internal, and then of course you have to deal with the Department of Labor. Trade schools don't do this. Now, on the face of it, you might think, well, that sounds great. It does it. Do you have the same level of quality that you're going to have with a registered apprenticeship program? I'm not so sure. And it might be a roll of the dice, as a matter of fact, that you're going to have that same level of quality. With a registered apprenticeship program, there are specific Department of Labor guidelines that they have to follow as far as how many hours you need to have as an apprentice. And then there's internally, okay, well, here's what we're going to teach you. And then we're also going to turn you into a journeyman or a journeywoman when it comes, time to top out. It could be 4 years, 5 years, depends on your trade, depends on what you're doing, depends on your locale and whatnot. Trade schools don't have that. They don't have it at all. Trade schools, basically what a trade school is going to do is I'm going to take you in. And let's talk about welding. Let's just use welding as an example, because that's primarily the one out of the rest of them that I'm more familiar with. And the reason why is because I've been in touch with numerous apprentices who have gone on to become journeymen, and it came through that particular program. You're going to spend several $1,000s. You're going to go to this trade school, and you are going to be in the classroom, and you're going to get a chance to weld. You're going to get a chance to weld. They may talk, and I'm just going to, off the top of my head, let's say they start you off with shielded metal arc welding or stick welding, and you're going to work on plate, first. And you're going to learn that, and you're going to learn the various positions. And then you're going to maybe play around with gas metal or MIG, and then you might play around with TIG welding. You're going to play around with GTAW. And so you might spend, and I think the last number that I heard was maybe 9 months. You're going to spend 9 months of your time welding. Now that sounds great on the surface. And you might come out of this apprenticeship, the trade school, with the ability to weld in all three of those processes. But the reality is, what is being used out in the field? What are the firms using? Whether it's a production firm and you are in a shop welding, or you're out in the field welding, what's being used? You might have spent a fair amount of time and money, I might add, to learn a process that is not actually being used. So the trade school is there to teach you. You might spend 9 months doing that, and then you're going to get out, and a lot of guys or gals end up going into a registered apprenticeship program. Skip all that, go into the registered apprenticeship program, and learn what the contractor base is actually using as far as welding in this particular example. Save the money. Now, on the heels of this, one of the things that I'm noticing over on Reddit is a lot of people talking about, well, I'm finding that I can go to a trade school and get in. but I'm having difficulty getting into a registered apprenticeship program. I won't pretend to have all the answers, but I will tell you one significant thing that a lot of people will not tell you, and that's trade schools don't care about the job market. I am under no compulsion as a trade school to tell you, the individual that wants to come in, that there might not be jobs around here. You know what I'm after? The money. I want more of you coming into my trade school, spending your hard-earned money to learn whatever skill. And I'm not trying to dismiss the totality of the skill. Don't hear me say that, by the way. But I'm enticed to get you to come in here so I can teach you. And then you can turn around, and now it's on you in a lot of ways to go out and find an employer, and then you're starting from the bottom anyway. Apprenticeship programs, however, are there, and the apprenticeship model that I'm talking about in the Registered Apprenticeship Program model, they are there to serve the contractors. The contractors that they are working with have specific needs, specific requirements, and then, of course, they have to adhere to Department of Labor standards. Well, they're not going to take in, or they at least attempt to try not to take in, more apprentices than they know that they can put to work. They don't want to waste your time. That's the intention. Trade schools have no such intention. Their intention is to make money. That's what they want. They want to make money. That's not the thought process when it comes to the apprenticeship program. So for those of you who may be sitting here weighing it out and deciding, well, I can get into a trade school, but I'm having a difficult time getting into a registered apprenticeship program, there's a reason why that is. Number one, it's from the workload. Can I get the apprentice in there and get them working? And how tenacious are you on your follow-up? But trade schools are under no such compulsion. They don't care about workload. They may tell you they do, but at the end of the day, if you've come in there, if you've spent your money and you have been taught whatever it is you're learning, then they are meeting their requirements. The apprenticeship program, there's another level of hierarchical control where we're like, hey, we want to make sure that we can put you to work. Otherwise, we're wasting your time and our time. So they may limit then the number of people. And I had a conversation with someone maybe 6 months ago. This is June of 2024. But I had a conversation with someone 6 months ago who was talking about the wait time for apprentices to get into, and we were in a major metropolitan area. And the wait time, or the wait list and wait time to get into the apprenticeship program was pretty long. I've dealt with apprenticeship programs that do not have a wait list at all. They're trying to get the word out. And then there are some apprenticeship programs that have an enormous wait list by the hundreds, people trying to get in. That's not the case for everybody. Some places don't get in there, which leads me to my next, discussion point, which is if you are a registered apprenticeship program, you're an instructor, you are a coordinator, training director, or whatever, I'm inclined to believe, from what I can see, all the evidence points me in the direction that trade schools actually spend a fair amount of money. I don't know exactly how much, but they spend some money advertising themselves. Maybe they use social media, and if that's a whole different podcast in and of itself. But if you don't use social media to, platform yourself and talk about the training that you bring out, you should get started. But there's a very real reason why trade schools seem to be more popular and known, for that matter. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I say in the Apprentice Spotlight series, and one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on promoting it, is because I think that registered apprenticeship programs are one of the best kept secrets, and they shouldn't be a kept secret. We should have people wanting to beat down the door to get in, and that's not the case in all the places. All the instructors and training directors that I deal with and have conversations with and whatnot, they don't have this issue. They have the opposite of trying to go out and find and basically what I would say is sell the apprenticeship program and the trade in general to younger people to bring them in and say, let's get to it. Let me tell you all the benefits. And so that's why I'm kind of bullish on the Apprenticeship Spotlight series, because these are young people that are going through it, and I want them to share it out so that other people can see, oh, well, here's a viable opportunity. Because I maintain that we in the trades are doing and have done and continue to still do a poor job at recruiting and getting the word out. We have to think outside the box, use social media, platform, partner up, use podcasts, and get the word out, because we need to tell people this. And if I can reach someone, you're listening to this podcast today and you're like, I'm considering a trade school. I don't want to discourage you completely from it. But if you can get into a registered apprenticeship program, I would highly advise you to completely skip trade school altogether. Trade school may have its perks, but I think trade school has arisen in the gulf, in the void, if you will, that a lot of apprenticeship programs have left because we're not actively recruiting and promoting our own trade. And so trade schools are out there, and you're driving by and you see a billboard, or you're scrolling through social media and you see a trade school, or they've got a snazzy podcast episode, or, I mean, they're using social media. I mean, that's their model, and they're very well aware of how to do it. And we're behind on the times when it comes to this. And so whether it needs to be done at a local level or a district level or a regional level or whatever, we need to begin to promote, maybe even have a multiple trade day where we go out and we promote it on the radio and everything else on social media, geofence, where we sit here and have this discussion. You can go, well, come on in, let's talk about these trades, the various trades, what opportunity is there. And if I can save you several $1,000s by skipping trade school altogether, then I will have done a good thing. And so if you're sitting here today and you're listening to this podcast, or you are listening to this podcast and you know people who are thinking about trade school, I don't want to completely discourage you. But I do want to say that if you are seriously contemplating this, that you should give it some thought about a registered apprenticeship program instead. You will be glad that you did in the long run. I assure you of that. And so when you compare trade school and a registered apprenticeship program, you're going to learn much of the same stuff when it comes to a registered apprenticeship program. But it's in a more structured environment, and it's spread out over, let's say, a 4 or 5 year period. You're going to go to work for a contractor or multiple contractors, and you're going to flesh out those skills that you're learning in theory and in the shop or in the classroom in the field. And last but not least, a word to the contractors, a word to the employers. Whether you get somebody from a trade school or you get them from a registered apprenticeship program, first off, I would highly advise that you seriously consider becoming a part of a registered apprenticeship program. And the reason why is the same reason that I want to sit here and actually end this podcast episode with a word to you. If you think that you can't afford to train apprentices because work is plentiful and you need people with experience, et cetera, my word of caution to you is this: you can't afford not to train them up. They are an investment into your future. And when you partner up with a registered apprenticeship program through a local union, the one thing that you're going to find is that you have a partner that you can offshore a significant amount of training. Their members, your employees, kind of come together. I'm training them up. I get time to invest into them, and they're the future of the workforce. If you think you're struggling to find people today, wait 10 years from now, and we'll see if we're having a different conversation or not. I'm either going to be having the same conversation with someone, and even though they were struggling today, they're on death's door tomorrow, or they were thought-provoking, intentional, and said, you know what? That's a good point. I need to be intentional about training up the next generation. And maybe for the whole industry perspective, as well as my own company, I need to look at this as an investment. Therefore, I'm going to be intentional about training apprentices. My advice is to get on board with a registered apprenticeship program. Come together, sit at the table, have discussions. And when you are growing your business, you're growing your industry, look at the local union from a registered apprenticeship program perspective and how they are a willing partner to help you train up the next generation that you've got coming in. You desperately will be needing them. I assure you of that. So when it comes to trade school versus a registered apprenticeship program wins out every time. I'm not completely dismissing trade schools, but the clarification and the points in this podcast episode needed to be made. There's a lot of confusion there. On one hand, you pay. On the other one, you're paid. On one hand, you got to go out and seek employment. On the other one, we're going to take you in and try to find employment for you. One is not governed by the Department of Labor. One is going to be governed by the Department of Labor. This one, the Registered Apprenticeship Program, is far more valuable in the long run. So there we go. Talking about trade schools and registered apprenticeship programs. Well, thanks for listening to the podcast episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.